The current, large-scale conflict between Russia and Ukraine did not begin suddenly in February 2022. That year marked a major escalation, a full-scale invasion by Russia, but tensions had been building for a very long time. For 8 years before that, a simmering conflict had already been taking place in eastern Ukraine. This earlier phase involved Russian-backed separatist groups fighting against Ukrainian government forces. Understanding this long history is crucial to grasping the complexities of the current situation. The roots of this war are deep, touching upon issues of national identity, regional influence, and, most significantly from Moscow's perspective, the expansion of Western military alliances towards Russia's borders, which it perceived as a growing threat to its own national security. Russia has consistently and very clearly stated its reasons for opposing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's expansion towards the east. Moscow views NATO not as a purely defensive alliance but as a military bloc that represents Western, particularly American, geopolitical interests. From Russia's point of view, the movement of NATO infrastructure and membership closer to its frontiers is a direct challenge. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many former Warsaw Pact countries and newly independent states sought security and economic ties with the West. As NATO welcomed these nations, Russia felt increasingly encircled. This eastward expansion, Russia argues, upsets the strategic balance of power in Europe and directly threatens its core security interests, making its borders less safe and its influence in the region diminished. A key point of contention dates back to the end of the Cold War, specifically around 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Russian President Vladimir Putin has often mentioned what he believes was a verbal promise made to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. This assurance, supposedly from the then U.S. Secretary of State James Baker, was that NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward beyond a reunified Germany. While Western officials dispute the binding nature or even the precise wording of this assurance, and it was never formalized in any treaty, for Russia it represents a broken promise. This perceived betrayal has fueled a deep sense of mistrust towards the West and NATO, shaping Russia's foreign policy and its reactions to NATO's subsequent growth over the past 3 decades. The situation became even more acute for Russia at the 2008 NATO summit held in Bucharest, Romania. At this important meeting, NATO leaders made a significant declaration. They agreed that Ukraine and Georgia, 2 countries directly bordering Russia and considered by Moscow to be within its historical sphere of influence, will become members of NATO at some point in the future. Although no specific timeline or membership action plan was granted at that time, the very statement was seen by Russia as crossing a critical red line. Moscow viewed this as a direct provocation and a serious escalation of the perceived threat from NATO, believing it would bring the alliance's military power right to its doorstep, fundamentally altering the security landscape in a way Russia found unacceptable. Ukraine, for its part, has its own national interests and aspirations. Following years of political instability and seeking stronger ties with Western institutions, Ukraine took a decisive step in 2019. The Ukrainian parliament voted to amend the country's constitution. This change was not minor. It formally enshrined Ukraine's strategic objective of achieving full membership in both NATO and the European Union. For many in Ukraine, this represented a clear choice for a European future, a path towards greater security, democracy, and economic prosperity. This constitutional commitment signaled a definitive turn away from Russia's sphere of influence and an alignment with Western political and military structures, a move celebrated by many Ukrainians but viewed with intense alarm in Moscow. This constitutional declaration by Ukraine significantly amplified Russia's existing security concerns. From the Kremlin's perspective, the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO was not just a distant possibility, but now a stated constitutional goal. This meant the potential for NATO military bases, troops, and advanced weaponry to be stationed directly on Russia's southwestern border, a frontier stretching for many hundreds of miles. Russia viewed this development as an unacceptable alteration of the strategic environment. It feared that Ukrainian NATO membership would irrevocably tip the regional balance of power against Russia, diminish its security buffer, and pose an existential threat to its national interests, prompting a more assertive and alarmed posture from Moscow. Even before the full-scale invasion in 2022, Russia made several diplomatic efforts and presented specific demands aimed at preventing war and addressing its security concerns. President Putin indicated a readiness to engage in discussions and even work on a peace memorandum with Ukraine. However, he consistently maintained that any lasting resolution must directly confront what Russia considered the root causes of the crisis. Chief among these was the issue of NATO's continued eastward enlargement. Russia sought guarantees that would fundamentally reshape the European security architecture, insisting that its core concerns about NATO's proximity to its borders be taken seriously by Western powers and Ukraine. As tensions mounted, culminating in late 2021 and early 2022, Russia presented a set of concrete demands to the United States and NATO. These were not mere suggestions, but conditions Moscow stated were necessary for de-escalation and a peaceful settlement. A primary demand, and one reiterated as recently as May 2025, was a legally binding written pledge from Western leaders to permanently halt NATO's eastward expansion. Specifically, this meant ruling out any future membership for Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. Beyond this, Russia's other demands included the lifting of certain international sanctions, a resolution for its frozen sovereign assets held in Western countries, and robust guarantees for the protection of the rights and culture of Russian-speaking populations within Ukraine. These demands were largely deemed unacceptable by NATO and the West. The failure to find a diplomatic solution led to Russia launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. This marked a dramatic escalation of the conflict that had been ongoing in eastern Ukraine since 2014. The invasion prompted widespread international condemnation and a raft of severe sanctions against Russia. In a significant geopolitical shift, and in direct response to Russia's actions and its aggressive posture, Finland, which shares a long border with Russia, joined NATO in 2023. Sweden, another historically neutral Nordic country, followed suit and became a NATO member in 2024. These accessions dramatically altered the security landscape in Northern Europe, effectively doubling NATO's direct border with Russia, an outcome Moscow had sought to prevent. By May 2025, after more than 3 years of intense fighting, Russian forces had managed to occupy and control nearly 1/5 of Ukrainian territory. These gains, primarily in eastern and southern Ukraine, came at a tremendous cost, with substantial casualties on both sides, and significant economic repercussions for Russia due to sanctions and military expenditure. Despite these costs, President Putin's stance on territorial claims appeared to harden. He insisted on Russian control over 4 regions in eastern and southern Ukraine: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, which Moscow had unilaterally declared annexed, a move not recognized by the vast majority of the international community. This hardening of positions made any potential peace negotiations even more challenging. The conflict has been characterized by the widespread and innovative use of drone technology by both sides, fundamentally changing modern warfare. Drones, ranging from small commercial models adapted for reconnaissance and dropping small munitions, to larger, more sophisticated unmanned aerial vehicles capable of carrying out significant strikes, have become ubiquitous on the battlefield. They are used for intelligence gathering, targeting artillery, and direct attacks. Ukraine in particular has demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in leveraging drone technology. A notable example occurred on June 1, 2025, when Ukraine executed a large-scale coordinated drone strike operation codenamed Spiderweb. This operation, reportedly involving 117 drones and taking a year and a half to plan, targeted Russian airbases deep within Russian territory. The impact of Ukraine's Spiderweb drone operation was reportedly substantial. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the strikes inflicted approximately $7 billion in damage. Furthermore, he claimed the operation destroyed over a third of Russia's strategic cruise missile carriers and a total of 41 aircraft. Among the aircraft lost were strategically important Tu-95 and Tu-22 bombers, as well as a valuable A-50 airborne early warning and control spy plane. Strategic analysts such as Frederick Mertens assess that these Ukrainian drone strikes have significantly diminished Russia's long-range striking power. This assessment contrasted with earlier estimates such as one by General Christopher Cavoli, who had suggested that Russia had lost only about 10% of its air force since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in early 2022, indicating the growing effectiveness of Ukrainian drone capabilities. The pervasive use and effectiveness of drones in the Ukraine war have not gone unnoticed by NATO and its member states. The alliance is closely observing these developments and actively working to adapt its own military doctrines and capabilities. Reports suggest that drones are responsible for a staggering proportion of frontline losses, with some estimates indicating around 80% of Russian casualties in certain areas are caused by drone attacks. Consequently, NATO members, particularly those bordering Russia like Finland and Poland, are incorporating drone warfare tactics and countermeasures into their military training exercises. For instance, the Lively Sabre 25 exercise in southern Finland specifically focused on teaching soldiers how to disperse and maintain mobility to counter the persistent threat posed by enemy drones, reflecting a new reality of battlefield vulnerability. Despite the ongoing hostilities and the clear impact of new technologies, diplomatic efforts, however fraught, continue. A second round of peace talks between Ukrainian and Russian delegations commenced in Turkey on Monday, June 2, 2025. However, reports from the region indicated that expectations for any significant breakthrough or substantial progress were very low. The entrenched positions of both sides, particularly regarding territorial control and security guarantees, present formidable obstacles to a negotiated settlement. Russia has also intensified its aerial attacks on Ukraine in the period leading up to these talks, perhaps as a way to exert pressure or improve its bargaining position, further complicating the atmosphere for constructive dialogue. Throughout the conflict, NATO has maintained its open-door policy regarding potential new members. The alliance has consistently refused to agree to Russia's demands to halt its expansion or to provide guarantees that Ukraine will never become a member. NATO leaders argue that every sovereign nation has the right to choose its own security alliances. For Ukraine, the aspiration to join NATO remains a central foreign policy goal. Ukrainian officials continue to insist on their path towards membership, viewing it as the ultimate security guarantee against future Russian aggression. They also actively seek robust interim security assurances from Western nations to bolster their defenses until full membership can be achieved, often positioning Ukraine as a crucial shield for NATO against Russian ambitions. The conflict currently exists in a state of dangerous stalemate, characterized by intense fighting, high casualties, and little prospect of an immediate resolution. Russia continues to control significant Ukrainian territory, while Ukraine, supported by Western military and financial aid, remains determined to defend its sovereignty and reclaim its land. The widespread use of drones has transformed the battlefield, but has not yet led to a decisive advantage for either side. Possible future scenarios range from a frozen conflict along current lines to a gradual war of attrition, or, more optimistically, an eventual negotiated settlement, though the terms of any such settlement are highly contested. The role of NATO, Russia's perceptions of threat, and Ukraine's determination will continue to shape this critical European conflict for the foreseeable future.